The desert was merciless. Heat shimmered off the rocks, turning the horizon into a wavering mirage. A figure stumbled across the dry earth, a bride, her wedding gown shredded by thorns and dirt. Sweat and dust streaked her face. Her breath tore through her lungs as she pressed on, driven by the single thought that she could not be caught. Then she heard it HOOFBEATS at first distant, then growing louder, the steady thunder rolling across the desert floor. She froze. Her eyes darted across the canyon, searching for cover, but there was none. The sound grew closer until shadows appeared on the ridge. 5 riders against the burning sky. Apaches. Her chest tightened. The settlers' stories came rushing back, whispered around fires and over kitchen tables. Women who vanished forever, women who never returned. She had never believed them. She believed now. The riders descended in a fluid arc, dust rising around them. Horses snorted, reins tightened, and the circle closed in. She backed away, pressed against a wall of rock, clutching what remained of her dress. One man dismounted. The leader. He moved with calm authority, each step deliberate. Tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes steady and unreadable. No anger. No rush. Just certainty. The runaway bride's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to shout, to plead, to explain that she wasn't running from them, but from her own people. Her voice failed. The leader stopped a few paces away. His gaze swept over her torn gown, dirt, blood on her shins. A single brow arched slightly. He spoke, his English careful but firm. "You are far from your people." Her lips parted, but nothing came. He tilted his head, studying her. Behind him, one of the younger warriors retrieved her veil from the brush. He held it out as if to mock her, but the leader's curt glance silenced the gesture. The veil dropped into her hands like a token of everything she had just tried to escape. "You ran," the leader said. Not a question. A fact. She swallowed hard. Her voice cracked, weak but defiant. "Yes." The silence stretched. Horses shifted, hooves scraping stone. The other riders waited, eyes fixed on their leader. Finally, he gave a short command in Apache. 2 men edged closer, hemming her in without laying a hand on her. She realized with a sick drop in her stomach that her flight was over. Still, something inside her refused to bend. She lifted her chin, meeting the leader's gaze head-on. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, but her eyes didn't drop. For the first time, something flickered across his face, not amusement, not pity, but recognition. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her. When he spoke again, his tone was lower, almost deliberate, as though he wanted her to hear each word clearly. "Go take a bath," he said. "And wait for me." Her breath caught. No threats. No violence. Just a command wrapped in mystery. It should have terrified her. In a way, it did. But beneath the fear was something else, something she didn't dare name. Her heart beat faster, not just with dread, but with the dizzying sense that her life had just veered off a road she could never return to. The riders shifted, ready to move. The leader's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, unreadable as the desert sky. Then he turned, and the decision of what came next fell on her shoulders like a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. The river ran shallow, its surface catching the last light of the sun. The bride knelt at its edge, her reflection fractured by ripples. She looked nothing like the woman who had stood at the altar only hours ago. Her gown clung to her in ruined folds, the once bright white dulled to the color of bone. Her hair hung loose, tangled with dust and streaks of sweat. She reached into the water with trembling hands and splashed her face, gasping at the coolness. The desert's heat seemed to bleed out of her for a moment, leaving only raw exhaustion. Behind her, faint but constant, she could feel them, the riders, the watchful presence of the Apache war party. They hadn't bound her. They hadn't struck her. Instead, they had brought her here and left her with a single order: go take a bath and wait for me. Her pulse still thudded from those words. A command that unsettled her more than threats would have. Why a bath? Why wait? She glanced over her shoulder. The men lingered farther up the bank, their voices low in their own tongue. They didn't watch her openly, but she knew their eyes were sharp. She was not freed. The bride peeled at the satin sticking to her skin. Every movement felt heavy, deliberate. The gown, once a symbol of purity and belonging, now felt like a prison she couldn't shed fast enough. She tugged it down from her shoulders, shivering in the evening air. A wave of shame flushed through her, not because of her nudity, but because she was doing this under their command. She stepped into the river. The water bit cold against her ankles, then her knees, then her waist. She gasped, teeth chattering, but forced herself deeper. The current tugged at her, carrying away grit, dust, and the faint copper tang of blood from scratches along her legs. She sank until the water covered her shoulders, tilting her head back, hair fanning out behind her. For the first time since she had fled the chapel, she closed her eyes. The river cradled her, silencing the pounding in her ears. For a moment, she wasn't a runaway, wasn't a captive, just a woman caught between one life and another. A sound broke the trance. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate. She opened her eyes and saw him, the Apache leader. He had returned. He sat tall on his horse, its coat dark as midnight, its muscles rippling under the saddle. His posture was relaxed, yet every line of him radiated control. His gaze swept over her, steady and unreadable. She froze in the water, caught like prey in a snare. The leader said nothing at first. He dismounted, every movement precise. He walked to the river's edge and stood there, arms crossed, as though waiting for her to speak. Her lips parted, but no words came. What could she say? That she hadn't meant to run into them? That she wasn't theirs to command? That she had run from her own people because she'd rather risk death than the life they had chosen for her? The words tangled in her throat. At last, he broke the silence. You look at me without fear. It wasn't true. She was terrified. Her legs trembled beneath the water. But still, she hadn't looked away. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even as her heart pounded like a drum. He tilted his head, studying her, as if weighing her spirit against the stories his people had told. Then he stepped back, his voice calm, final. Wait for me. And with that, he turned, walking back to his horse. He mounted in a fluid motion and rode a short distance up the bank where his men still lingered. None of them spoke. The bride stood half submerged in the river, chilled to the bone, her mind racing. Wait for him? For what? Judgment? Mercy? Something else entirely? The water lapped at her skin, carrying away the last remnants of her old life. Yet with every ripple, she felt the weight of a new one pressing in. The river clung to her like a second skin. Cold, unyielding, and alive with motion. It stripped her of everything she had carried, the dust, the sweat, the streaks of blood on her legs. The runaway bride stood waist-deep, shivering, her arms wrapped around herself. The satin gown drifted at the surface like a pale ghost, too heavy with water to float freely, tethering her to a past she no longer claimed. Every ripple felt like an accusation. Who was she now? Not a bride, not yet a captive. Something in between, suspended in the current. She bent down, cupping the water in her hands, and let it spill over her face. It stung, sharp as needles, shocking her into clarity. With trembling fingers, she loosened her hair, freeing it from pins she hadn't realized were still clinging. The strands cascaded over her shoulders, darkened by water, fanning out around her. She dragged her fingers through the tangles, pulling free grit and tiny thorns. Each tug felt like tearing away pieces of her old self. The river was silent except for its low rush against stone. The Apache riders had kept their distance, forming a loose perimeter along the bank. Their voices rose occasionally in short exchanges, but none of them came close. They did not leer, did not laugh. Their restraint only sharpened her awareness of being seen. And yet something shifted as she sank deeper into the current. For the first time in days, she wasn't running. The river carried away the frantic edge of her fear. Her body, though trembling, began to release the tension it had been holding since she fled the chapel. She thought of the altar she had abandoned. The groom's face, stern and expectant. The murmurs of the congregation when she turned and fled. The crushing weight of what everyone else had decided her life would be. She thought of how her lungs had burned as she bolted into the wilderness, veil streaming like a flag of defiance. The river didn't ask anything of her. It simply accepted. She drew in a breath, fuller now, and slipped down until the water closed over her head. The world above vanished. Sound dulled to a distant roar. The cold wrapped her whole body, erasing sweat and fear. She opened her eyes underwater, watching the distorted glimmer of the sky above, the shifting patterns of light on the riverbed. For a heartbeat, she felt free. When she rose again, gasping. Droplets streamed down her face like tears she had refused to shed. She wiped them away, though her hands shook. On the far bank, she caught movement. The Apache leader had returned, though he stood apart from his men. His posture was the same as before, straight, composed, impossible to read. His gaze fixed on her, unwavering. Her breath caught, heat flaring beneath her cold skin. Why was she obeying him? Why hadn't she bolted again the moment she was near water? But she knew the answer. She couldn't have outrun them. She couldn't have survived the desert alone. And deeper still, though she hated to admit it, was something more: curiosity. His command hadn't been cruel, hadn't been meant to humiliate. It had been deliberate. As though the bath wasn't just about her body, but her becoming. She turned away from his gaze, scrubbing at her arms, her shoulders, even as gooseflesh prickled across her skin. She wanted to scrape off every trace of the bride she had been forced to become, the painted face, the gilded cage, the vows she had never wanted. Each handful of water became an act of erasure. By the time the sun slipped lower, staining the river gold and red, she no longer felt like the same woman who had stumbled into the Apache's path. The gown lay heavy and ruined at her side. Her body was bare under the water. But for once she didn't feel exposed, she felt stripped down to truth. When she finally stepped out of the river, she wrapped herself in the blanket one of the riders had left on a rock. It smelled faintly of smoke and earth. She clutched it around her shoulders, lifting her chin as she walked back to the firelight. The men shifted to make space, their eyes curious but not mocking. She felt their stares, but they weren't the stares of the congregation she had fled. These eyes didn't measure her against duty or expectation. They simply looked as if weighing what she might choose to become. And across the fire, the leader's gaze locked on hers again. Still calm. Still unreadable. But this time, she thought she saw something flicker there, a recognition, a question unspoken. She sat by the fire, the river still dripping from her hair, her heart still hammering. For the first time, she felt not just like a runaway bride. She felt like a woman standing on the edge of something vast, something terrifying, something new. The fire cracked softly, sending thin threads of smoke into the cooling desert air. The runaway bride sat close to the flames, wrapped in the coarse blanket, her damp hair clinging to her neck. The warmth licked against her skin, easing the chill of the river, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside her chest. She could feel him. The Apache leader stood apart from the others, his presence impossible to ignore. He was not a man who needed to raise his voice or flaunt authority. His silence carried weight enough. He leaned against a smooth boulder, arms crossed, gaze fixed on her with the same calm intensity he had shown at the river. The other men spoke quietly among themselves, their words carried in the lilting cadence of their language. Sometimes they glanced her way, curiosity flickering across their faces. But their attention drifted, eventually returning to their conversations. Their laughter, the easy rhythm of a group at rest, not his. His eyes never left her. At first, she tried to ignore it. She pulled the blanket tighter, shifted her body to angle away from him, stared into the fire until the orange glow blurred her vision. But every flicker of flame only seemed to sharpen the awareness that he was watching, not with hunger, not with mockery, but with something far more unsettling. Interest. It unnerved her more than hostility would have. She told herself she should be furious. She was not his to study, not his to command. She was her own, had proved that by fleeing the chapel and leaving behind the chains of vows she had never spoken willingly. Yet the truth she dared not whisper, even to herself, was that his gaze did not feel like ownership. It felt like recognition, as though he saw something in her that even she hadn't uncovered yet. Her heart beat faster, traitorous in its rhythm. The leader shifted slightly, his profile catching the firelight. His face was strong, carved by years of sun and wind. There was no cruelty etched into it, no impatience. Just stillness. She realized he had been watching her since the moment she entered the river, and she wondered what he saw. Behind her, the wind carried voices, his men speaking low, glancing at him, then at her. She couldn't understand the words, but she caught the tone, questioning. They were asking him something about her. His answer was short. Final. The men nodded, the conversation ending as swiftly as it began. Whatever doubts they carried, his word had silenced them. The bride's chest tightened. What had he said about her? What decision had already been made, with her life hanging in the balance like a feather on the wind? Her eyes flicked back to him. He caught her glance instantly, as though he had been waiting for it. The connection jolted through her like a current. She held it longer than she meant to, her pulse thrumming in her ears. Then, without a word, he moved. The leader stepped away from the boulder and walked to the edge of the fire's glow. He crouched there, close enough for the flames to light his features clearly. His eyes were dark, steady, unreadable. For the first time, she noticed the faint scar tracing his jawline, the mark of battle survived. "Why do you run?" he asked. The question landed heavy, simple, and devastating. Her throat tightened. She could have lied, claimed she had wandered too far, that she had been lost, that she hadn't meant to cross their path. But his eyes told her lies would crumble. "I was not." "Free," she whispered. The words barely carried over the fire, but he heard them. His expression didn't change, but something in his gaze sharpened, as though a puzzle piece had fallen into place. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. Then he rose, stepping back into shadow, leaving her with the echo of his question and the terrifying relief of her own. "Answer." The bride wrapped the blanket tighter around herself, staring into the fire. She could still feel him watching, but now she understood he wasn't seeing a captive. He was seeing a choice, and the weight of that was heavier than any chain she had ever worn. The night deepened. Stars blinked awake above the desert, scattered across the black sky like shards of broken glass. The fire burned low, its glow throwing restless shadows across the camp. The riders settled into their routines, checking horses, laying out blankets, sharpening blades. Life carried on as if her presence meant nothing, but not for him. The Apache leader remained apart, yet constant. His presence weighed on her like a tether, invisible but unbreakable. His gaze would shift from his men to the horizon, then always back to her. The bride sat rigid by the fire, the coarse blanket clutched tight, her hair still damp from the river. She had replayed his question, "Why do you run?" 100 times in her head. Each repetition stripped her further bare, until all her justifications, all her half-truths, felt hollow. Her jaw tightened. Enough doubt she rose to her feet, the blanket falling to her shoulders like a makeshift cloak. The fire crackled behind her as she stepped across the sand. Every movement felt reckless, but something inside her, anger, courage, desperation, pushed her forward. The men turned to watch. A few paused in their tasks, brows raised, murmurs exchanged. She ignored them. Her eyes locked on the leader. He stood at the edge of the camp, speaking in low tones with one of his men. When he saw her approach, he lifted his hand, dismissing the warrior. Silence fell. The bride stopped a few paces away. Her heart hammered, but her chin lifted. "You command me as if I am yours," she said, her voice sharp with a boldness she hadn't felt before. The words hung in the air, trembling between defiance and fear. The leader regarded her in silence. His expression didn't harden, didn't soften, only watched. The stillness stretched until she thought she might break beneath it. Finally, he spoke. "You obeyed," her breath caught. It was not an accusation, not even a boast. Just a fact, spoken with the same calm authority as before. "I had no choice," she snapped, one brow lifted, a subtle challenge. "Always choice," her throat tightened. The desert seemed to press closer, heat still lingering in the night air. "What choice?" she demanded, her voice rising. "To die alone out there? To go back?" Her words faltered, but she forced them out, raw and unpolished. "To live a life that was never mine?" For the first time, something flickered across his face, acknowledgement. He stepped closer, closing the space between them until she could see the scar along his jaw, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. "You speak truth now," he said. Her chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. His nearness rattled her, though he hadn't touched her. She hated the way her body betrayed her, the heat rushing to her cheeks, the unsteady rhythm of her breath. She forced herself to stand straighter, to hold his gaze. "What do you want from me?" she asked. His eyes lingered on hers, steady, unflinching. "Not want. See." The words landed heavy, their meaning elusive yet undeniable. He wasn't claiming her. He wasn't threatening. He was telling her something more dangerous, that he saw her. Her heart thudded painfully. No man in her world had ever looked at her that way, not the groom, not her father, not the congregation. Their eyes had always measured her against expectation. His gaze weighed her against nothing but herself. For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped behind her. The horses shifted. The desert wind whispered. Finally, he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Rest," he said, voice low but firm. "Tomorrow, you choose." Confusion flooded her. "Choose what? Choose whom?" But he offered no further explanation. He turned away, his silhouette merging with shadow as he joined his men. She stood there, trembling, every nerve alive. The confrontation had not ended in chains nor in escape. Instead, it had left her with something far more terrifying, the knowledge that the next step might be hers alone. She pulled the blanket tighter, staring into the fire once more. For the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't afraid of fighting. She was afraid of being seen and of what she might see in herself when forced to decide. Dawn bled slowly into the desert, washing the sky with pale gold and lavender. The fire had burned down to embers, sending up thin threads of smoke that curled into the morning air. Horses stamped and snorted softly, their breath visible in the chill. The tribe stirred with the first light, voices rising low and steady, like the desert itself waking. The runaway bride sat wrapped in her blanket, eyes raw from a night without sleep. Her thoughts had circled endlessly, chasing the leader's words. "Tomorrow, you choose?" What choice? She had replayed the phrase over and over, searching for meaning. Was it a cruel game, a test of obedience? Or had he meant something more? Her gaze flicked to him. The leader stood with his men, issuing quiet commands as they broke down camp. Even here, among equals, his presence commanded gravity. His words carried, but his eyes remained steady, watchful. When he finally turned toward her, she froze. He walked across the sand, every step measured, until he stood before her. The others kept their distance, but she felt their eyes. "You rise," he said simply. Her body obeyed before her mind had time to resist. She pushed herself to her feet, blankets slipping from her shoulders. The morning air stung against her skin, but she lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "You spoke truth," he continued, his tone calm, even. "Not free. Not yours." Her throat tightened. The echo of her own words returned to her in his voice, made them feel heavier. He gestured toward the horizon, the distant shimmer of the settlement she had fled. "You go back. Men wait. A life chosen for you." Her stomach knotted. The memory of the chapel, the expectant crowd, the groom's stern face all came rushing back like a noose tightening. Then his hand shifted, palm open, toward the camp behind him. The warriors busy with their horses, the fire, the mourning. "Or you stay. A life here. Different. Hard. But yours." The world seemed to narrow to those 2 points on the horizon. Behind her, the cage she had escaped. Before her, an unknown road cut through fire and stone. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wanted to demand what stay meant. Did he mean as a prisoner? As part of their people? As his? The questions clawed at her, but his gaze silenced them. He was not offering explanation. He was offering decision. "You will not be forced," he said, each word deliberate. "Choice is yours." Her heart pounded, louder than the rustle of the wind, louder than the shifting hooves of the horses. No man had ever spoken to her that way, not her father, not her groom, not the preacher. Never hers. Always theirs. And now, standing barefoot in the desert dawn, a stranger gave her the one thing she had never been offered, freedom to choose. Fear licked at her spine. If she went back, she knew the shape of her life. It would be suffocating, but safe. If she stayed, the path was wild, uncertain. She might never belong, never survive. But at least it would be hers. She looked past him at the camp. A few warriors watched her with curiosity, one with open skepticism, another with quiet amusement. They were not her people. Their language was strange to her, their ways foreign. She would always be an outsider, yet when her eyes returned to the leader, she felt the steadiness of his gaze settle into her bones. He wasn't asking her to belong to him. He was asking her to decide who she was. Her breath came shallow, her chest tight. "And if I choose neither?" she asked, voice trembling. A faint smile ghosted his lips, quick, fleeting. "Then you walk desert, alone, the river, the sun, the sky. They will decide." Her blood chilled. He meant it. If she refused both paths, they would let her go, but the desert would finish what her people had started. The silence stretched, heavy, demanding. The world held its breath. The runaway bride stood between two horizons. Behind her, chains. Before her, fire. Around her, eyes waiting to see who she would become, her hands clenched at her sides. Her pulse thundered. The moment had come. The desert stretched endless in every direction, a vast stage of silence waiting for her choice. The Apache camp moved around her with quiet efficiency, blankets folded, weapons strapped, saddles tightened. But she stood frozen, as if the world itself had paused. Her heart beat too loudly. Go back, stay, or walk the desert. 3 paths, each demanding something of her. The bride closed her eyes. In the darkness behind her lids, she saw the chapel again. The heavy air, thick with perfume and expectation. the rows of faces watching, judging, whispering. The groom at the altar, lips pressed tight, eyes hard with entitlement. The preacher's voice had droned, each word another chain tightening around her neck. She had stood there in lace and satin, a doll dressed for display. Her future had felt like a coffin. She had run. Feet pounding marble, veil tearing free, shouts chasing her into the blazing sun. Every step had been a scream. Mine, mine. Now she opened her eyes to the desert dawn. The choice she had demanded with her flight was here at last. Her gaze shifted to the Apache warriors. They moved with purpose, their hands steady, their words clipped and efficient. Some looked at her with curiosity, some with doubt, but none with the suffocating expectation she had known back home. To them, she was not a prize, not a pawn. She was something to be tested. Her eyes found him, the leader. He stood at the edge of the camp, back to her now, speaking quietly to a younger rider. His posture was calm, unhurried, as though time itself bent to his command. Yet she could still feel his awareness of her, like a string tied taut between them. He hadn't demanded obedience. He hadn't taken what he could have by force. Instead, he had placed the burden in her hands. Choice is yours. The words echoed through her chest, louder than any vow she had ever heard. Fear clawed at her. What did it mean to stay? She could never be one of them. She would always be marked by where she came from. She might never belong fully. She might never be safe, but safety had already betrayed her. Her breath shook. She pressed her fingers into the coarse blanket around her shoulders, grounding herself in the scratch of its fabric. Her skin still remembered the river's chill, the way it had carried away the dust and lies. For the first time in her life, she had seen herself stripped bare, not a bride, not a daughter, not a pawn. Just a woman. And for the first time, that had felt enough. She lifted her head and looked toward the horizon. The faint outline of her settlement shimmered in the distance. She imagined the road back, her father's stern grip, the groom's bitter claim, the suffocating walls closing in again. If she returned, her freedom would end the moment her feet crossed that threshold. Her jaw tightened. No, the other horizon drew her next. The campfire's smoke, the horses, the warriors who had not bound her, who had given her water, food, even space to breathe. Hard lives, harsh land. But here, at least, she could decide how to carry it. Her chest ached with something unfamiliar hope, fragile and dangerous. The leader turned then, as if sensing the shift within her. His gaze found hers across the camp, steady and sharp. The weight of it pressed against her, but it did not crush. It anchored. And in that gaze, she felt something awaken. Not just survival, not just rebellion, something deeper, the first taste of belonging to herself. The runaway bride straightened. The blanket slipped from her shoulders, falling into the sand. She stood bare in the morning air, hair wild, eyes unflinching. For the first time in her life, she did not feel like a runaway. She felt like someone standing at the beginning. The awakening was not gentle. It was fire in her veins, lightning in her chest, the sudden knowledge that she would never again kneel to chains, spoken or unspoken. The desert had not broken her. It had revealed her, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to the bone, that when she chose, it would not be with trembling, it would be with fire. The sun broke over the horizon, spilling light across the desert. The sky shifted from lavender to burning gold, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The runaway bride stood barefoot in the sand, hair loose around her shoulders, blanket at her feet. She had shed it like the gown before it layers of a life that no longer fit. The Apache camp waited. Horses were saddled, packs secured, men ready to ride. Yet no one moved. All eyes flicked, now and then, toward her. She was no longer background. She was the moment. The leader stood apart, his silhouette stark against the rising sun. His gaze was steady, patient. He had given her the night, given her silence, given her the weight of her own decision. And now he waited. Her heart beat steady, not the panic thrum of fear, but the fierce rhythm of resolve. She thought of the chapel again, of the vows never spoken. She thought of her father's grip, the groom's claim, the congregation's whispers. Chains, all of them. She looked to the horizon where her old world lay. The shimmer of rooftops in the distance blurred in the morning haze. That road was still open. She could walk it now, demand to be taken back, and no hand here would stop her. She knew that. But she also knew what waited there. A cage dressed up as duty. A coffin dressed up as marriage. She turned her head slowly, gaze falling on the camp, the fire smoke rising, the warriors watching, the leader standing with that unwavering stillness. Hardship lay there too, uncertainty sharper than any blade. She would not be coddled, would not be protected from the brutal weight of survival. But the choice would be hers. Every day, every breath, hers. Her chest swelled with a breath that felt like fire. She took a step forward. The men stirred, murmurs rippling through the camp. Some nodded, some frowned, but none interfered. The path was hers. The leader's eyes found hers as she crossed the sand. The morning light cut across his face, illuminating the scar at his jaw, the lines of command carved deep. He did not smile, did not move. He only watched. She stopped in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough to hear the soft exhale of his breath. Her pulse hammered, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I choose," she said. The words hung in the air, solid as stone. She did not say what she chose. She didn't need to. Her presence before him, her bare defiance against the horizon she had left behind, said everything. For the first time, the faintest shift touched his expression. Not triumph, not surprise, something subtler. Respect. He inclined his head once, slow, deliberate. Then he turned to his men, issuing commands in their tongue. The camp moved again, alive with motion. Horses were led forward, gear adjusted. The day had begun. The bride no longer runaway, no longer prisoner stood at the center of it all, the desert wind tugging at her hair. She did not know what her new life would demand. She did not know if she would survive it. But the unknown no longer terrified her. The leader mounted his horse, then extended a hand down toward her. Not a command this time. An offer. She hesitated only a heartbeat. Then she placed her hand in his. His grip was strong, steady, grounding. He pulled her up with ease, settling her behind him. The camp began to move, the riders forming a line that cut across the desert. The sun blazed higher, painting the horizon in fire. The woman who had once been a bride looked back only once. The faint shimmer of her old world lay behind her, already fading in the light. She turned her face toward the unknown, her heart fierce, her spirit unbound. The new path had begun.